All right, break out your best flannel because the Georgetown Fall Market is going to happen on October 14th and 15th. More than 30 Georgetown businesses will host in-store and sidewalk sales along Wisconsin Avenue. You can enjoy a pumpkin painting competition, live music, outdoor dining, face painting, and more free activities, all while you shop for the best fall finds from your favorite small businesses. Visit georgetownmainstreet.com/fall market to plan your weekend. That's georgetownmainstreet.com/fall market. Today on CityCast DC, we are talking about the latest twist in a goofy Adams Morgan development saga and why it ought to matter to you, even if you never hang out at the late unlamented SunTrust Plaza. I'm here with our teams Priyanka Tilve and Kayla Cote-Stemmerman to talk about that, plus some thoughts on school renamings. And it's Friday the 13th of Halloween month. We have some suggestions for getting in a haunted mood. Today is Friday, October 13th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. All right, so Priyanka, I used to work years ago in Adams Morgan. Sometimes we would go get lunch at So's Your Mom and sit in this kind of bleak 70s style plaza in front of a bank with no tree cover particularly. I was sort of surprised to see it become the focus of a big development fight in the last few years. And it's one that CityCast has covered some, and there's news from it. What is going on?
Yeah, I agree. I used to live right down the street from SunTrust Plaza, Truist Plaza, whatever you want to call it, and it's ugly. And so the fact that there's this big fight over saving it is pretty bizarre to me. The TLDR, for people who haven't been following along, is that this plaza used to be a public space in the 1970s. It's been a long time since it was used for anything particularly great. It's honestly just like a big triangular concrete space. There's no shade there. There's no greenery, nothing really to do.
It was a public space in the sense that the public could use it, but technically it remained private property.
Yes, yeah, that is true. And the last few years, a small group of activists in Adams Morgan have been fighting Truist Bank because Truist has been considering selling it to a developer to build luxury apartments. It's become this like long, litigious legal battle. And now Truist has decided to donate the land to Jubilee Housing, and they're going to build affordable housing on the space instead. And I am extremely curious to see how the activists are going to respond, because they had a bit of moral high ground when they were saying they wanted a public space over luxury apartments and, like, you know, push back against gentrification and all that. Now that it's going to be public space versus affordable housing, I'm interested to see what they're going to say.
Yeah, I tend to think in DC when there's people clamoring to save something that nobody particularly liked before, and particularly when the claim is around open space, because DC is a city with like great amounts of parkland, like, you know, bustle and density is a thing we usually are trying to create. Mm-hmm. That when those kinds of claims are being aired, there's usually some other issue at play. And at this one, it was like, I think, good old-fashioned NIMBYism. And the developer, it's the firm behind the wharf, among other things. This was like a pretty elegant FU. Like, we are sick and tired of this fight, and now see what happens. Do you really want to save an open space, or do you suppose building new stuff, which is like a really loaded thing in DC where housing is so expensive?
I mean, calling it an open space is generous even. It's like truly like a small square of concrete that people sometimes stand on to get the bus. If it was going to be a public functional space, it would need massive changes and massive renovation to make it an intriguing place to spend any time. So as it is, I don't see it as being useful for anything. You know, if you're going to do something, like, you either make it an actual open space if that's what you're going to set your heart on, which I think is dumb, or go this route and get more housing, get affordable housing. I actually think it's kind of a smart move on their part if they're trying to get out of this fight.
But it's also like, this is a thing that is actually like pretty relevant for all of DC, because to me, at least, it shows how many ways there are to bring projects you don't like to a halt or slow them down. And, some people might think that's good, some people might think that's bad, but it is just sort of a fact of Washington. It makes it harder to build new stuff, to open restaurants, to build new developments. I suspect it causes things to be more expensive as a result of that. So even if you never go to that neighborhood, it's the kind of thing that happened in your neighborhood too.
That's a really good point. I also think that when you're talking about these kinds of changes, or when people are pushing for these kinds of changes, you have to take into account what else is in the neighborhood. Like, I know some people have compared this AdMo Plaza, or what the AdMo Plaza could be, to Franklin Park downtown, which they recently redeveloped and reopened. And I love Franklin Park. It's big, it's green, it's a great space to hang out with friends for picnics. They do a lot of outdoor movie screenings there now. But that is like a truly transformative space in an area that is otherwise just concrete buildings. And AdMo doesn't have that problem. Like, you've got Kalorama Park right down the street. You've got Walter Pierce Park right down another street.
Yeah.
You really don't need a park on that corner. And it kind of doesn't fit with the vibe of what 18th Street is all about. Like, that is a commercial street. It's a place to go out, to eat, to drink, to party. Having a park there just doesn't feel like it's the vibe.
I also tend to think, like Franklin Square, it's really nice how they've redeveloped it. It used to be like a pretty grim public space. But the best possible thing that could happen to that neighborhood would be for someone to build a ton of housing and there to be like residents passing through. Because even now, if you go to Franklin Square at night, there's no one lives around there. So there's just, it has like that feeling that a lot of people don't like, of being in a fairly empty urban space in the dark. And paradoxically, maybe the best thing that could happen at SunTrust Plaza is someone put up an office building, because Adams Morgan by day doesn't have nearly so much going on, because it's a neighborhood that, it's got residents, it's got a lot of residents, which is great. And it's got people who come for nightlife and entertainment, but there's not, that many people like I used to be ducking out from their cubicles to lunch.
Yeah, that's true. I think best case scenario here would be if it is like a mixed use. I don't think that this is in the works right now. They've only really said that it's going to be affordable housing. It's probably going to be 40 subsidized apartments. But if they could do a mixed use space, so some sort of like office space or retail on the ground floor, apartments above it, and then actually make that triangular area in front, not necessarily a public space for hanging out, but just prettier, like have some greenery, have some flowers, I think that would be a game changer.
The brand new Arbor at Tacoma is built for your most convenient urban living. Whether you want to enjoy the vibrant Tacoma, DC community or comfortably retreat into a sleek sanctuary all your own. The kitchens have striking dark navy and white cabinets, and throughout the home, there are wood floors and smart home technology. Some homes even have a private outdoor space. With a quick walk to the metro, you can easily head into downtown or stay close and enjoy the retail that's on site. Located at 218 Cedar Street Northwest, the Arbor Tacoma offers brand new 1- and 2-bedroom condos starting in the upper 300,000s. Visit thearbораttacoma.com for more information. That's Tacoma with a K, so TheArborattacoma.com. Picture this. You're at the airport or strolling through the grocery store, and suddenly there they are, someone who seems tailor-made for you. You know that feeling, right? That instant connection you can't ignore. But then they leave. Another missed connection? Not so fast. Introducing Never Missed, the revolutionary dating app that turns those chance encounters into unforgettable beginnings. It's simple. Download the Never Missed app for free right now on the App Store or on Google Play. In just moments, you'll be ready to transform fleeting glances into lasting connections. Don't let serendipity slip through your fingers. Embrace the possibility and excitement of finding your someone right when you least expect it. Download the Never Missed app and make your story of how you met an unforgettable chapter in your journey.
All right, so going out to the suburbs for a minute, do either of you guys, fairly smart, well-informed people, know who Wilbert Tucker Woodson was? W.T. Woodson?
No.
Absolutely not. And my cousin's kids go to a school by that name, and yet I have no idea who that is.
So my first theory of educational naming is that when you don't recognize the name, it's usually a minor local official who was the namesake. It's kind of like a gold watch when they retired. And sure enough, W.T. Woodson was the second longest serving superintendent in the history of the Fairfax County Public Schools. He worked in the county from 1929 to 1961, his name got put on a high school during the age of suburban growth and new schools being put up. And it has always been thus until now, maybe, because there's people who want his name gone from that high school. The reason is that he opposed desegregation. Virginia was like the forefront of the battles over school desegregation. It was a place where the governor of the state shut down public schools because, God forbid, they be integrated. But his name stayed on the school. I tend to be like not trigger happy on renamings, but I think schools are a little bit of an exception because schools are like a living community for the people who continue to go there. So there was a meeting scheduled for this week to discuss the name, but the new name proposal that really kind of grabs my fancy is to simply rename W.T. Woodson after Carter G. Woodson, who is the very prominent, like the father of Black history, a DC figure. And when there was a proposal to rename Woodrow Wilson High School after August Wilson, the playwright, and the idea was, alumni will be able to still say, like, I went to Woodson. And there's not that kind of disruption, but the objectionable name is taken off. I think it's a really clever fix. And in this case, it's like, I had a big argument with one of my friends about the Wilson renaming because they ultimately renamed it Jackson Reed after the first Black teacher at the school and after the first Black superintendent of DC public schools, i.e., a minor local official in the grand scheme of things. And I'm kind of like, oh man, I feel like schools should be named for like, I don't know, like astronauts or civil rights leaders or, like that there's a kind of an aspirational thing. And my friend's theory is like, no. The thing about Jackson Reed that's so cool is like, that's the only school in the world that could be named Jackson Reed. Like that's the one place where it resonates. And the uniqueness is magical. It's a good point. I don't agree with it. It's a good point. What do you guys think? Like if you were naming schools or renaming schools for that matter, what would be your sort of North Star?
Yeah, I feel like kids don't really care about local officials as much as maybe we do. But I do like the idea of switching the name so that it's the same last name, right? Like it's like they renamed Swan Street to Swan Street and there was like no logistical hassle behind it, right? Like you said, alumni can keep the name, like their swag stays the same, like their signage stays the same. It must be just a much easier logistical lift to switch it to something so similar.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up the Swan Street thing too, because for anyone who doesn't remember, this happened earlier this year. Swan Street is a road in Northwest DC, and it was named for Thomas Swan, who was a former governor of Maryland, but also was a slaveholder. And then they changed it to honor William Dorsey Swan instead, who was born a slave and then became a queer rights pioneer when he moved to Washington. So really, really switching up the meaning behind the Swan Street. But Kayla, like you said, like no hassle involved. So I agree that that's a nice thing about Woodson, like keeping the name. But one of the former alums of Woodson, who was at a public hearing about this a while ago, argued that they should change the name to like not represent a person at all, like go with something more ideological or a value, because she was like, 50 years from now, the school could run into this exact same problem again when something unsavory comes out about the new Woodson, which I think is actually a point that you made, Mike, when we had this conversation about the potential of changing Marion Barry Ave.
Well, right. My bigger sort of theory of this is like you have to think of the intent in naming. And like, I make an exception again for schools because they are a living community. But like, something that's named after, I don't know, like Thomas Jefferson, who, owned slaves. It's appalling. It's not named after him in order to honor his slave owningness. It's named after him because he was the third president, because he was the author of the Declaration of Independence, blah, blah, blah. Which is to say he's got this horrific blight on his record. But it wasn't like when things are named after like Robert E. Lee, the only reason that anyone knows who Robert E. Lee now is that he like betrayed his country in the name of a rebellion to protect slavery. No one's like, oh, he did a great job in the Mexican-American War. Like we should name some stuff after him. And, so I sort of feel like that intent ought to be taken into account. So if you name something for Barry, you're not like naming it for him to, honor the like poorly executed executive of his late terms in office. It's, that's like a totally legit renaming. And I think if you get too picky about like, but he did these crappy things, or he got arrested, or he, took a bad, like, anti-gay stance late in his career. That way is the path to ruin with all human beings.
Yeah, that's a fair point. We'd never be able to name anything after a human again.
Right. And like, even, if we're going to go down this road of like what the future may hold, like even naming things for, like, there's certain behaviors that rise and fall in our estimation over time. So if you name something like, Chivalry High School, it seems great like 100 years ago. But anyway, I think that breaking out Carter Woodson's name would be a cool thing for that school.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's cool. It also is in keeping with what Fairfax has been doing generally, which is changing a lot of names lately, mostly street names. Most of them were honoring things related to the Confederacy, and now they're switching them over to other stuff. And it's cool that Fairfax is kind of on this journey.
Yeah.
Well, if you have an opinion on the Woodson High School renaming, I think they're making a final decision at the November 9th meeting, but they're going to be soliciting public opinion up until then. So I guess call in.
All right. So as we said at the top of the show, it is Friday the 13th in October.
Ooh.
Halloween is looming.
It's the spookiest of Friday the 13th.
I don't know about you guys, but I have young kids, and they have decked out our house in spooky gear.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
So, Kayla, you are our things to do person. What should we do if we want to embrace the spookiness?
Yeah, so DC is really getting into the spirit, as you may be able to tell. If you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll see that every event these days is basically some sort of Halloween or costumed event. So I pulled together like a few things that aren't necessarily Halloween related, but they are like haunted and death and evil related. So if that's your thing, these are for you. So a few things that are happening this weekend. You have Death at the City Tavern. It's actually in Alexandria. Sorry, it's not in DC, but very accessible from DC. And essentially they'll go over with you what the guidelines were for the mourning period, like when Alexandrians were in mourning, like way back in the day. And you can like sip your little spirit and make your little mourning pendant and like dress in black if you want, and just be very, very somber and with the vibe of the 13th.
Just leaning into the spookiness.
Yeah, really just like, I feel like Alexandria is already kind of a haunted place. Like there just feels like there's a lot of ghosts, and like the aura there is already leaning that way. So I think it's a great place to go. We've got also the Film Noir Festival, which is this like dark film festival. It's opening on Friday. It goes through October 26th. It includes like all the classics, like all those really like sort of old school, like bloodied, like scary, but like unrealistic way.
Wait, so are these like, are we talking about like film noir from like the 40s and 50s?
Yeah. Like old school.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
But that's happening throughout the month. So you've got a little time. And the last one I have down for DC, this is not happening this weekend, but you should buy your tickets this weekend because it sells out quick, is the Soul Strolls at the Congressional Cemetery, which is so fun. Basically, there's these actors and you walk around the cemetery and they act out these tragic tales of people who are buried in the cemetery. It happens at dusk. It's foggy, it's spooky, it's haunted. They're great performers, and it's honestly so fun.
Yeah, that sounds like a great time. I am a big fan of cemeteries in general.
Really interesting. Let's unpack that.
That's for our therapy session later.
And you guys just went again to Markov's Haunted Forest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's also a few places outside of DC that you should really, really go if you have a car. Like, please, it's so fun. Our team just went. Priyanka, do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah. So it was our second time going. Last year we went and we did an episode on it, which we'll link to in our show notes if you want to check that out. The last 2 minutes of it is just us screaming. Again, this year when we went, it was like 30 minutes of us walking around screaming. It's just this, like, there's extremely high production value for this haunted forest. It's a trail that goes, like I said, about 30 minutes long, but they have different sections. Like there'll be a creepy dollhouse, ghost-oriented house where I don't know what the theme is, but they chase you with chainsaws. And I'm just in awe of it every time I go. And I am not the type of person that likes scary things, but because this haunted forest is so well produced and so thoughtful, I thoroughly enjoyed myself. And we also this time went and checked out a separate part of Markov's, which is called the town, which is, again, like you're walking through a creepy trail, but this one is town themed. So you're walking through the general store and the sheriff's office, and they have townspeople throughout that kind of haunt you. It's really cool.
Yeah, the
It's
production
definitely
value
scary,
is
though.
crazy.
Yeah.
There's like
Yeah.
hundreds of actors, and it's amazing.
But how far away is it?
Yeah, so that's the downside. That one is like an hour away. If you want something a little bit closer, not quite as much of a production, we got Field of Screams. That's in Olney, Maryland. That's probably about 40 minutes away. It's a little bit smaller scale, but you still have that same sort of haunted forest. You walk through, there's games, there's axe throwing, there's bonfires, etc. And then we also got Laurel's House of Horror in Laurel, Maryland, also a little bit closer. This is in an abandoned movie theater, which already sounds really scary to me, honestly. And they have a haunted house, but they also have a series of escape rooms that are horror-themed escape rooms, which quite frankly sounds horrible to me. But if that's your vibe, you should go. Let us know how it is.
Most of that sounds horrific to me, but the abandoned movie theater part is the one thing that's enticing. Like, that sounds eerie in a cool way to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think abandoned movie theaters are inherently horrifying,
I guess that's what they're going for.
even after they get repurposed as CVS's.
Yeah.
Priyanka, Kayla, good to see you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to be here.
And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. Our lead producer is Priyanka Tilve. Our producers this week are Julia Karen and Noah Snyderman. Our newsletter editor is Kayla Cote-Stemmerman. Our production assistant is Susanna Brown. And our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer from Politico. Music is by Alex Roldan. If you enjoyed the show, scream about it at your nearest haunted forest. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye. Oh, right. Like, call Northside 777. He walked by night.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but okay.